Good evening and welcome to Homecoming 2013 and the first in our Visionary Conversation series for this season. My name is David Barnard. I'm the President and Vice Chancellor of the University of Manitoba and your host for the evening. This is the third season in this award-winning series, and we're pleased to have a new partner this year, CBC Information Radio. So please join me in welcoming Marcy Marcusa, host of Information Radio. Marcy will be monitoring social media tonight, and we'll give her the opportunity to ask the first question when we come to the question period from someone that she's in touch with. We're meeting tonight in Treaty 1 territory and on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe peoples and the homeland of the Métis Nation. This university, the Forks of the City, sit at the crossroads of the Anishinaabe, Métis, Cree, Dakota, and Oji-Cree nations. And we're beginning this season of Visionary Conversation sessions looking forward into our city's future. Our topic tonight is Welcome to Winnipeg, Population 1 Million. This forward-looking topic has many implications. What decisions need to be made now to prepare for a population of 1 million? What will it mean for economic and community development? What's the impact on public safety? How do we ensure that barriers are removed to ensure the success of Indigenous peoples? We're fortunate to be joined tonight by alumni, friends of this community, and our distinguished scholars who will explore this and many other factors, good and bad, associated with urban growth. And as always, we'll be looking to you, the audience, because you will be important contributors to this discussion, and your input will help guide the conversation later in the evening. So let me just explain the format to you. Each of the panelists will have 5 minutes to comment on the discussion theme. And after the panelists have spoken, we'll open the floor for comments and questions. A couple of colleagues will have wireless microphones that they'll be circulating around. So if you raise your hand to indicate your interest, we'll try to get to as many people as we can. And we would like to involve as many in the audience as possible. So I would ask you that you are brief in your questions and your comments. If you want to follow our conversation on Twitter, the hashtag is #UMVisionary. We'll wind up the discussion by 8:30, and it's now my pleasure to introduce the first speaker. Mr. Jim Carr is the founding president and CEO of the Business Council of Manitoba. His career spans a variety of interests from the arts to journalism to public office. He's a graduate of McGill University. We are not holding that against him for tonight. He's a graduate of McGill University with joint honors degrees in history and international relations. He is currently a board member of the Arthur V. Morrow Center for Peace and Justice at St. Paul's College here at the University of Manitoba and of the Winnipeg Symphony Orchestra, and he's director emeritus with the Canada West Foundation. Mr. Carr was inducted into the Order of Manitoba in 2011, and it's a pleasure to welcome him here. Please join me in welcoming Jim Carr.
Thanks, David. As Director Emeritus of the Canada West Foundation, I can tell the story that I first met you when we were colleagues on that board, long before you were President of the University of Manitoba. And I got to know you then as a person who was thoughtful, reflective, spoke only when he had something important to say, and you had very many important things to say on that board, and you continue to be a leader in our community, and I want to congratulate you for this series and all you've done for Winnipeg and Manitoba. The first question to ask is, well, do we want 1 million people? Do you want 1 million people? Or is 750,000 enough? We are not accustomed in this community to growing pains. We haven't had a lot of that since the days of Laurier when he opened up the West in the first part of the 20th century. And all those immigrants came from all over the world and settled this prairie land. But now we have to contend with where it is we want to go as a city and as a community. And I'm not going to spend my 5 minutes debating whether or not 1 million is a good thing or it's the right number. I'm just going to say, let's assume it's a good thing and it's the right number. So who will the Manitobans be? Well, the best way to project the future decade or 20 years is to look back. And do you know that most of our growth during these past 2 decades has been from those who have chosen to come here from around the world and those who have chosen to come here from remote northern reserves? My favorite graph, Marcy, I know it's radio, but this is a graph on my right hand. This is the decade between 1999 and 2009, and this is the graph of the number of immigrants who came to Manitoba, from 3,000 to 15,000. And during that same period, the unemployment rate steadily declined. Now, there is a myth buster for you. The more immigrants we welcomed, the more jobs that were created, and the fewer people who were unemployed. Now, just cast your minds back to 1867 when Canada became a nation. Where were your ancestors in 1867? Shout it out for me. Where were they? Iceland. Ukraine. Russia. Scotland. Norway. India. Brazil. Netherlands. Okay. 10 seconds, 10 countries. If I had 20 seconds, I bet you we could stretch it to 20 countries. So why should we believe for a moment that our future should be any less dependent on welcoming people from all over the world than our past has been? And they are coming. They're coming from everywhere. We were able in the late 1990s to strike a deal with the Government of Canada. And it's important that I define who I mean when I say we. We was the conservative government of Gary Filmon struck a deal with the federal liberal government of Jean Chrétien. And they created the provincial nominee program, which enabled us to bring in immigrants that we thought would be likely to succeed and settle in our communities. We started out at 500 a year, 1,000, 1,500, and then they got tired of setting quotas, so they made it unlimited. And then when Gary Dewar became premier, he re-energized the file with the Chrétien Liberals and the Martin Liberals, and deepened yet again by the Selinger New Democrats and the Harper Conservatives. So what does that mean? That means that everybody can take credit for a progressive policy. And the favorite line in the throne speech was when the lieutenant governor would get up and he'd say, and I'm very proud to say that in 2008, my government will welcome 12,443 immigrants to Manitoba en route to a goal of 15,000. So because it was born out of a spirit of bipartisanship, because it had the support of the community and the communities that make up Manitoba, we were able to establish a reputation and a model of immigration policy that is not only studied across the country, and by the way, all the provinces want exactly what we have, which parenthetically is a problem for us, but they're also studying what Manitoba has done all around the world. So if we are going to get to 1 million people, we're going to have a lot more people with skills, with entrepreneurship, with a thirst for the freedom we give them, for the quality of life that we have made our own in Winnipeg and in Manitoba, and there's only going to be more of that. If you look at the demographic trends, you will see that the birth rate in the Indigenous population is much higher than it is in the non-Aboriginal population. You will see that the educational chances that these kids are getting on and off reserve are not the same as my children have. That is a national disgrace. If we are going to build a future with the strength within these communities and these talented children, we are going to have to break the jurisdictional paralysis. What do I mean? The federal government sets the per pupil grant, which is 2/3 of what the province gives to everybody else in this community who's not Aboriginal. There is very little jurisdiction within the provincial school boards and the Department of Education to offer the advice and the help they have. We need the engagement of the leaders within these communities themselves, and we have to say to them, we are here to help you establish first-rate K-12 education, and then to offer all of the bursary and scholarship programs we can to make sure that they get over these barriers that we can't even dream of. The Business Council of Manitoba hosted on May the 9th a conference on Manitoba's past 15 years, looking forward to the next 15, with the desire and the goal of writing the annual report for Manitoba in 2028. And it didn't matter what we discussed, whether it was education or healthcare or northern development, the key was educating Aboriginal young people. The Business Council that I have the privilege to lead is taking that seriously with lots of our energy. I could say more, it'll come out in questions. This is a remarkable place. It has grown out of isolation and a harsh climate. It has built a community based on those principles of tolerance and openness. We embrace diversity. Diversity is our future. This is a great place. Let's be visionaries together. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Our second speaker tonight is one of our distinguished alumni, Mr. Brent Bellamy. Brent is a senior design architect with Number 10 Architectural Group here in Winnipeg. He has a personal commitment to the principles of sustainable design and a passionate desire to create sensitive and efficient architectural forms that provoke thought and stimulate the imagination. Examples of projects that he has led include the Winnipeg Humane Society, the University of Winnipeg Richardson College for the Environment, and the Qualico Family Center at Assiniboine Park. Born from a great passion for his community, for the past 3 years he has written a feature column in the Winnipeg Free Press titled On Architecture, where he discusses Winnipeg's design and urban issues. Please join me in welcoming Brent Bellamy.
Hi. So, 1 million people. That's a lot of people. That's adding about 200,000 to what we have today. So I thought it would be interesting to look back and see what did we do with the last 200,000 people, and are there any lessons that we can learn from that moving forward? So I created this map showing the city of Winnipeg in 1970. Yellow is the 1970, and that's when the population of Winnipeg was 580,000. The green, you can see, is today, about 780,000. So that's 200,000 people. And what this represents is a 34% population increase, but an 80% increase in land area. Simply, the old city was built for people. We built walkable neighborhoods. We built to a human scale. Since 1970, or roughly then, we've decided to build our city with cars as the baseline. And so what are the economic consequences of this? I mean, the concept is quite simple. If you have 3 people paying for 1 kilometer of road, and you reduce the density, and all of a sudden there's only 2 people paying for 1 kilometer of road, you sort of have 2 options. You can either not fix the road, or you can make those 2 people pay more. And so, you know, it's a bit of a sport in Winnipeg to talk about higher taxes and potholes. But it really comes from, it's sort of our own fault. It comes from the type of city that we're building. And it's not just potholes, it's all the community infrastructure that comes with building a neighborhood. Sewers, schools, garbage collection, snow clearing, everything that the city can offer. I just want to quickly delve in a little deeper into the actual neighborhood and discuss the differences between a car city and a person city. This is River Heights and an area out by the Mint. Happens to be where my sister lives. And I'm just going to compare these two quickly. River Heights is a person-oriented development. The square you can see, this square here and this square here represent 40 hectares of land. In the person-oriented neighborhood, there's 1,000 houses in that land. In this neighborhood, there's 350. What that density does in River Heights and older neighborhoods like that, it creates a walkable area. It creates a walkable neighborhood. The orange squares represent schools. There's 11 schools in this area here. These represent community clubs and arenas. So there's 3 arenas and 11 schools, all supported by a walkable neighborhood. And the commercial strips are run along the streets. There's no big parking lots. There's no, they're supported directly by the adjacent neighborhood, so people can walk to the corner store. In the car-oriented neighborhoods, you can see there's only 2 schools. There's no community clubs or arenas, so they have to drive somewhere around here. And the commercial area, because it has to draw from a larger area, becomes a regional mall with huge streets that go to it, big parking lots. So the infrastructure to support that sort of car-oriented development is vastly more expensive, and there's vastly fewer people paying for it. But for me, it's not just about where we build, it's about what we build. I'm a big believer that we need to be building a city that people can fall in love with. Winnipeg is an unloved city. This means designing with the idea of putting people first. Considering the human experience in our city. How do people interact with each other, and how do people interact with our city? We have long forgotten how to create spaces that invite people to interact. It's a great failing of our city and something that I hope we can change in the future. And I really think that that's the kind of city that people can fall in love with. You know, it's been mentioned that our growth comes from immigration largely. So once those people are here, how do we keep them here? How do we keep our young people from leaving? The only way to do that is to make them fall in love with our city. Like, my friends from university are spread all across the country. Almost none of them still live in Winnipeg. You know, they didn't fall in love with Winnipeg's cheap houses. They've fallen in love with Vancouver, Toronto. They've fallen in love with the vibrancy. They've fallen in love with the activity. They've fallen in love with the human interaction with each other in their community that you don't get here. Nobody falls in love with Pembina Highway. Nobody falls in love with, you know, a big box store development. Nobody falls in love with residential neighborhoods with no sidewalks. And even if they did have sidewalks, they have nowhere to walk to. People fall in love with being with other people. These kind of neighborhoods. This is Wolseley, this is Corridon, this is Sherbrooke. You know, we have these types of neighborhoods, but they're all in our original plan. Our new neighborhoods are completely disregarding how people interact with each other. And I'll just quickly touch on the downtown as well. I mean, this isn't a suburban problem exclusively. It's also about the downtown as well. We've been systematically engineering people out of our downtown for decades. This is an image from the 1966 Municipal Development Plan, which they developed it perfectly. I mean, everything they did happened kind of to our lament now. But this was the existing, and this was the ideal that they wanted to create. So you can see what they've done is they've taken the texture of human interaction, the texture of the human experience, and removed it completely. And this is what our downtown looks like today. So really, I think our goal as we move to 1 million people is to put the human back into our city. And I'll leave with 4 words that I think should be our mantra going forward. I think Winnipeg needs to dream big, but think small. Thank you.
Thank you, Brent. Our next speaker is Dr. Rick Linden, Professor of Sociology in the Faculty of Arts here at the University of Manitoba. Dr. Linden has written over 60 published papers and reports. He's the author or editor of 4 books, including Canada's best-selling criminology text. He's the co-chair of the Manitoba Auto Theft Task Force, which implemented a prevention strategy that reduced auto theft rates in Winnipeg by over 80% and received the 2010 Quality Policing Award from the International Association of Chiefs of Police. He's also the chair of the Manitoba Police Commission and serves on the management committee of Winnipeg's Gang Response and Suppression Program. He received the Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal for his work in crime reduction. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Rick Linden.
From a criminological point of view, my vision for the future of Winnipeg is that within a decade or so, crime and public safety issues will have disappeared as an issue in our city. And I know that conflicts with the more common view of the future of crime in Winnipeg, which is reflected in this T-shirt, which some people feel is a useful way of advertising their city as the crime capital of Canada. I think a lot of us think of the city in that way. And I want to tell you how I came up with a different kind, a more optimistic vision than many people have. I was doing a presentation for a conference the provincial government put on in March 2012 on crime prevention. And I was going to give a talk on evidence-based crime prevention programs, discuss our auto theft program a bit, basically the kind of presentation that I've probably given a dozen or 2 dozen times before. And a couple of things happened that caused me to take a broader view and perhaps a more transformative view to where, and the topic that I finally came up with was, can we end crime in Winnipeg? And a couple of the things that led me in that direction were, first of all, I was reading a book about the crime decline in New York. And I'd known, of course, that crime rates had come down in New York, but I was astonished that from this book, between 1990 and 2010, crime rates in New York dropped by 80%. And this graph, which is difficult to read, is from the book. And it just shows that of the 7 major crime types, all of them dropped by that amount. So essentially, crime disappeared as a significant issue from the minds of many New Yorkers. The other was that I'd lived in Winnipeg for about 40 years, and it's only been in the last few years when I've seen a new kind of optimism among Winnipeggers, more of a pride of place and a hopeful view of the future. And I'm not exactly sure why that's the case. I think the fact that we got our hockey team back is part of it, and I think that building beautiful buildings like this with world-class museums inside would be part of it. And maybe it's just because we were having warmer winters. The day of the conference, it was going to be plus 22, so I was able to say, this is a great city, we've done away with winter. However, the fact that in March 17th, 2013, it was minus 28, so we didn't do such a good job of that. Anyway, given what was going on in New York and this new, what I thought was a new spirit of Winnipeg, I wanted to see how did we compare with New York City. So I took the 9 largest cities in Canada, compared crime reduction in all of those cities over a 20-year period. And you can see here Toronto and Ottawa crime rates came down by over 60%. The rest of the cities averaged about 50%, and Winnipeg is bringing up the rear at in the 20% range, and most of that was due to the auto theft reductions. So that in all the other types of crime, we weren't doing well. And this wasn't exactly a positive finding. And the questions that I asked while I was doing this paper was, or the presentation was, why do we accept living in one of Canada's highest crime cities, and what can we do about it? And I was able to get together with some people with whom I'd worked in some of the anti-crime programs. And what we decided to do was to learn the lessons of WATS. And WATS is the acronym Winnipeg Auto Theft Suppression Strategy. And as most of you know, in 2006, we weren't just the auto theft capital of Canada, we were the auto theft capital of North America. Our rates were 80% higher than the second highest place, which was Modesto, California. We dropped our auto thefts from 14,000 to 2,000 with a made in Manitoba strategy. And so we decided that we would try and learn the lessons from WATS. What were those lessons? We needed a goal. And in the paper I talked about the goal of ending crime. We needed to use evidence-based programs. We needed a broad effort focusing on prevention, intervention, as well as enforcement. We needed a responsibility center. Somebody had to run this thing and coordinate all the moving parts. The program would be scaled to the scope of the problem, which means you need sufficient resources. Auto theft was a huge problem. We needed huge resources to solve it, and we got it courtesy of MPI and the provincial government. Ultimately, of course, we realized that we're only going to end crime if we work with individuals and communities to deal with the factors that cause crime, and Jim has addressed some of those already. And so this was the basis of a plan that we hope will soon begin in the William White neighborhood. And I'll just conclude with the broad outlines of this plan. It has 3 components. One is smart policing. The Winnipeg Police Service have already started doing this, and smart policing essentially is the police not just responding to calls, but proactively dealing with hotspots, high crime areas, dealing with high rate offenders, because most crimes are committed by a relatively small proportion of the population. In addition, an integrated service delivery model that we're borrowing from Glasgow, which has been implemented in Prince Albert and very successfully there, and is being adopted by several other communities across Canada, where instead of agencies working in silos, they work collectively on cases. And then finally, on the root causes, community social development. And the city has a Live Safe initiative that will be part of that. And so a vision for the future is that we get this program up and running in the next few months, that it proves successful, and that we're able to move it into the other high crime parts of the city and accomplish the vision of ending crime effectively.
Thank you. Our final speaker is Dr. Wanda Wuttunee, Professor of Native Studies and Director of Aboriginal Business Education Partners at the Asper School of Business. Dr. Wuttunee's teaching and research focuses on future Aboriginal business leaders and benefits for home communities, Aboriginal business efforts, and as well as encouraging the mainstream business community in working towards vibrant, sustainable, and healthy Aboriginal communities. Her research brings to the forefront the many ways in which Aboriginal peoples are contributing to the economy. She's increased the exposure of future leaders to Aboriginal economy issues over the last 19 years at the University of Manitoba. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Wanda Wuttunee.
Tansei, it's a pleasure to be here. I'd like to live in Jim's community. I think, and all of the speakers before me, I think Winnipeg is a wonderful city to be in, and after 19 years and raising my kids here, my opinion has not changed. Martha Flaherty, president of Powtuit Inuit Women's Organization, said about Canada, Canada can be a diverse, exciting, productive, caring country, a country where every child has an equal opportunity to grow up full of hope and enthusiasm for the future. So my focus today is on Aboriginal people in Winnipeg, and I think that's a great statement for Winnipeg as well to consider for our future. Will we be able to offer every child in Winnipeg that opportunity for, full of hope and enthusiasm, including every Aboriginal child? Jim raised the point that we have to think about our Aboriginal youth in the future. And there's some other things that I think we have to consider as well if we're going to have a positive impact in the perhaps 20 years that it takes to get to 1 million. I want to talk a little bit about the mix that we have in Winnipeg. We have a core of dedicated advocates for Aboriginal people in all spheres of our population. A recent report, on the other hand, concluded that Winnipeggers hold a view more widely than any other city that was looked at in that report, that Aboriginal people have brought their problems on themselves. We have the Truth and Reconciliation reports and records in this university, which will help people understand a portion of our history. Very important. In a recent racism workshop that was held, the group was asked to identify which groups they hold the most stereotypes about, and that was Aboriginal people. On the other hand as well, we have young people of all ethnicities taking studies in Native studies to understand Aboriginal people as part of their course of study that will in the future, I think, aid them as they become leaders in our communities. So how do we get to the place of equal opportunity with hope and enthusiasm for Aboriginal people in Winnipeg? We are more than our problems, but we do have our challenges. So we make up currently 10% of the population in Winnipeg. 45% of Aboriginal adults have a post-secondary degree, a diploma or certificate, and that is focused in business management and public administration. That's the #1 area. And enrollment has increased 77% for university and college for Aboriginal students. So that's really exciting news. That's very positive. Education, the opportunity to pursue an education is critical, I think, for the next step of contributing as employees, employers, and small business owners. As was mentioned, however, there's the ongoing, obstacle with underfunding in on-reserve schools, which is a huge obstacle for a lot of our kids to see employment and see education opportunities. In terms of employment within the city of Winnipeg, the employment rate for Aboriginal adults lags a little bit behind the rest of the population, so that's a plus. And there's been a very good uptake in terms of small businesses in Winnipeg, more than 130 Aboriginal-owned businesses. We have an Aboriginal Chamber of Commerce that's very unique in the country. However, on the other side, while we make up 13% of the population in Manitoba, Aboriginal inmates make up 70% of the population. So what Rick was referring to in terms of concentrating on the people who are doing the crimes, high probability that it's Aboriginal inmates or Aboriginal people. And as well, there is a lot of poverty, and that poverty sits with Aboriginal households. So there's a real mix of opportunity, and some of that opportunity is being realized, but there's also still a lot of obstacles. I think in terms of the federal government and the provincial government and the municipal governments and chief and councils, I think there's a pretty clear idea of what we have to do in order to make a difference. And in Winnipeg, it's no different. Each one of us has a responsibility to look at what kind of community we're working to build and to support and encourage those programs that are working, those businesses that are out there that are trying hard to survive, but not only look at the broader picture. I think we have to take it to a human, personal level, as was talked about our city buildings. I think we as individuals have to look at where we can make a difference in our Winnipeg, because nobody else cares as much as we do. And we're a great city for that. So I think that the future looks very positive. It's going to take a lot of work and a lot of effort. One really cool statistic that I love sharing is that TD Economics predicts that in 2016, the economic footprint in Canada for Aboriginal people will be $32 billion. So our Aboriginal households, businesses, and government will play a huge part in our Canadian economy, and that includes Manitoba, and that includes Winnipeg. I'm really interested in building a community for my kids and my grandkids, because my kids love this city, and I think they'll still be here when we reach 1 million. I'm really interested in doing something, and I'm hoping that I can put a challenge out to each one of you today before you leave, that you will think about something that you're not already doing that is on your heart for Winnipeg, maybe not necessarily Aboriginal oriented, that you can do that will help make and build the community that you have in your mind. And you're going to share it out loud with your neighbor before you leave, because then that makes it a real deal. So I put that to you. I like the idea of a culture of safety that our police chief has said, but I'd also like to see it a culture of hope and enthusiasm for Winnipeg's children, including Aboriginal children. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Wanda, and thanks to all the panelists for a really broad range of perspectives on this question. I mentioned at the beginning that for this year of Visionary Conversations, we're working with CBC to help us bring our discussion to a larger audience and to continue the conversation beyond this evening. So before going to the audience here, I'll give an opportunity for Marcy to ask a question from the CBC social media followers.
Thank you. Oh, you're going to hold it for me? Ooh, what are you doing tomorrow at 5:30? Okay, so lots of activity and lots of response. When Brent was speaking specifically, I'm just going to hone in on what the first question here for Brent. Just comment online, walkable cities make people fall in love with cities. It is important for people to think about retaining immigrants and young people, so people agreeing with much of what was heard tonight. But Jordan's written to us at CBC Manitoba tonight, and he says, I'm a young person, and I'm wondering how we change and make more affordable homes outside of the city. Or rather, he says that there are more affordable homes outside the city. So that's some of the reality of why people choose to live in neighborhoods that might not be River Heights, because they can afford those homes. So how do we change the affordability of homes within the heart of Winnipeg if our dream is to have more of those people sort of filling up our urban core?
That's a tough question to start off. Use less wood. They'll be cheap. No, I'm just kidding. You know, I think diversity in all neighborhoods, urban and suburban, is really the key to creating a great city. And it's really important to have all levels of economic diversity economic diversity in the neighborhood. So I think, you know, one thing that I always harp on is sort of maintaining our heritage buildings. And we might not be able to make single-family homes that much, Sort of the economics of the real estate market dictate that. But I'm a real proponent of maintaining our heritage buildings because I see them as an opportunity for lower rent, not just housing, but businesses as well. Like, it allows the opportunity for people, new immigrants coming to Winnipeg, can't start up a business in a Class A office building, but they can start one up in a heritage building that is a sort of lower rent and has that opportunity. And loft housing is sort of the same. Reusing our building stock to provide greater diversity in our neighborhoods, I think, is a key for doing that.
Great, thanks for that. I'm going to look for indications of interest in the audience. If you want to raise your hand, and we'll get to you. So up there, Chris.
That was pretty good setup.
Yeah, we're recording though, so.
My question is, I guess, to anybody on the panel. I noticed one thing that was missing from this discussion. We will never be able to boast being the city by the mountains or by the sea or by the lake. But what we can boast, I think that's what is within Winnipeg's grasp, is to become the most livable city. We can, if we're smart about it, become the city with affordable housing, the least shortest commutes, least frustrating commutes to work, if we design our infrastructure and growth properly. And I think one of the critical things in being able to create happy communities and a livable city is active transportation. But I noticed that that's not on the table. And frankly, with City Hall, it's fallen off the table more often than it's been on the table. So I was just going to open it to any panelists as to what they think about that.
Sure. Jim, want to start?
We may not be the city by the lake, but we're the city by the lakes. And it's a, well, I think you'll find that the affordability of those properties are well within the range of many Winnipeggers and many Manitobans, and compare that to what you have to do to buy a cottage in Toronto. And it's not only access to the lakes, you don't have to own the cottage, but you can, within an hour and a half of Winnipeg, be in the wilderness on a canoe. You can find yourself next to the muskrats and the otter and the eagles, and the only thing you hear is that and the rustling of the leaves within a very short drive of Maine and Portage. We have access to some of the finest recreational places in the world. And speaking of recreation, if we can imagine what Winnipeg would look like if we would only develop the northern part of this province, where there are huge untapped resources looking for us to explore with Aboriginal communities, looking to build a road north of 60 into Nunavut, looking to stimulate literally billions of dollars of activity that will, again, fuel the capacity of Winnipeg to supply these places. So you're bringing up city by the lake, city by the rivers, city next to nature. I don't think we have to take a backseat to very many on that file.
What about the transportation? Brent?
Oh, sorry. Can I just have a quick answer to that?
Sure.
I talk about that all the time. I totally agree with you. We don't have a seawall, we don't have mountains, but we do some great things. Winnipeg has some great things. We have the best collection of heritage buildings in the entire country. So let's stop tearing them down. We have to take advantage of our advantages because we don't have the obvious things. A great example for me is Osborne Village was voted the best community, the best neighborhood in Canada last year. And it is a great neighborhood. South Osborne is also quite a great neighborhood. But they're disconnected by an area that, it was old rail land and that. And so instead of taking advantage of an inherent good thing that we already have, when we developed in between those two neighborhoods, we developed a car-oriented gas station. MTS is there. It's totally a suburban development. Instead of drawing on something that is great, we just defaulted to the easiest way to develop it and lost what we have. So I think we really have to take the little things that we have, the things that I said that people fall in love with, and make them flourish, as opposed to, because we're never going to have the mountains.
Good evening. Excellent presentation. I noticed you mentioned that population rose from 580,000 to 750,000 from 1970. Do you have the statistics on the increased number of potholes? My suggestion is that we have citizens adopt a pothole. I notice Councillor Smith is here. He can bring it up to council, but lacking his presence, I don't see His Worship Mayor Sam Cates. I believe he's guarding his back lane sign so it doesn't get vandalized.
Thanks for that comment. So question up here.
All right, thank you everyone for speaking tonight. This question's for Brent. It's for public transportation. We're a community campus here, and I just want to know what your vision is 50 years, 100 years about what public transportation should look like in Winnipeg so we can thrive.
3-kilometer bus lane's good. No, I'm just kidding about that too. You know, my whole presentation was about thinking smaller, and we can't keep growing bigger and bigger and bigger as we get bigger. We need to start growing inwards, and a key way that cities across the world are managing their internal growth is by using transit-oriented development. Instead of thinking of building busways and LRTs as expenditures, we need to look at them as opportunities to manage our growth and to grow even more. You know, the Lord Roberts development that's happening right now along our meager little transit line is going to be an amazing infill development. It's going to bring, I can't remember the number, it's like 5,000 people and really reinvigorate the Lord Roberts area. It's going to fill those schools that are half empty right now. All the retail along South Osborne there will be reinvigorated with all this new infill development. And we don't have to build any any schools or any of that infrastructure. So I see as transit as really being the key for our city to sort of grab the reins and implement infill development as we get bigger.
Thank you. John?
Well, you've heard from Marcy. Perhaps you'd like to hear a voice from the CBC's distant past. First of all, my thanks to all the speakers. I want to pick up on something that Jim Carr said because it resonated with me. Jim was saying that our better future depends on an improved education system and embracing diversity, and I think, Jim, you're absolutely spot on. But I do think, and this is what troubles me, is that I think we have to stop the drift towards what I would call polarization. We have to stop denigrating government. We have to stop besmirching business leaders. You know, there's the public sector and the private sector. I think they each needs each other, and we need, as a community, both of those sectors thriving and thriving well. So I would say that there is this perception, though, that political leaders, too many of them, have picked sides. And people feel that that is a barrier to coming together and really getting the job done. What would you say, Jim?
I would say that the two examples of immigration and First Nation education make the point. The immigration policy was successful because all the parties agreed, and because they were able to put together a coalition of business leaders and others, and they drove together towards a common objective. The Aboriginal file on reserve is dysfunctional because of jurisdictional paralysis, when all you have is infighting, people who are trying to operate within their own sphere but not reaching out enough, or as much as they could, in order to work together towards a common objective. So that might be the best example of all of the point you're making. Also, there are people in this room who I know who have political ambitions, and that's a good thing. The motivation to serve community has to also be met with the understanding that you have to be persuasive with people. You have to be able to make an argument. And that argument can't be bound only by the rigidity of partisanship, because if you make common sense, you'll get people's attention, and you'll make more coalitions than you think.
I wonder if I could just ask a variation on that to Rick. You talked about reducing crime. So could you say a little bit more about the three-point program that you outlined at the end of your remarks? What would be the things that would get in our way of accomplishing that? Is it the kind of coalition that would be necessary to bring it off? Or is there a talent issue? Or is there a resource issue? What would stop us from achieving what you described?
Two major problems are a lack of leadership. Nobody over the last couple of decades has stepped forward in Winnipeg and said, I want to be the person that leads us into a safer future. We now are getting some of that leadership from the new police chief, who's talked about his culture of safety and is completely on side with this. And partly because of him and partly because of other things, he's drawing other people into that because he's making a convincing argument and convincing people that they should be a part of it. And the other, again, is a jurisdictional thing. If we have a municipal government that doesn't talk to the provincial government and doesn't see Winnipeggers as both Manitobans and Winnipeggers, then they're not going to be able to work together. And with the, with the different responsibilities, let's say in the William White area, split between province, municipality, some federal, unless you work together, you're not going to come up with a comprehensive kind of solution. And the experience has been that unless you get multifaceted solutions, you're not going to be able to deal with a complex issue like crime.
Thank you. Question here?
I think we're very lucky here in Winnipeg. We have wonderful, wonderful green spaces. We have wonderful arts. We now have tremendous bike lanes even. What we could do with is more lights for bikes, so we can cross safely the streets. A comment maybe to Dr. Bernard is, I hope we can take Brent's saying, dream big and think small when we plan Southwood Green, that will become an area where we can meet, where we can walk, where we can have shops, where we can have little boutique restaurants, coffee shops, and communicate with, or commute and meet, have a meeting place with friends.
You know, every time someone comments on Southwood, I'm encouraged at the level of interest there is in the community about that project, because we're entering into a phase with that project where we're going to be needing a lot of community consultation to develop the detailed plans of what will happen there. So we, many of you will know, we've been looking for a team of designers to work with us, and we'll soon be announcing the results of that search. But then some very hard work begins to pull together ideas and refine the basic ideas that will come to us from the competitors, and I'm hoping that you'll be part of that conversation. Yeah, and the community participation's been great. We really appreciate it. We'll want it to continue. Up at the back?
This is for Brent or anyone else that has the answer. Aboriginal crime, or at least the perception of Aboriginal crime, is largely responsible for the decline of Winnipeg's downtown. So how do we fix that?
There may be several perspectives on that. Brent, do you want to start?
I wouldn't necessarily say Aboriginal crime, but poverty for sure is an issue. And perception is also a huge issue, and urban design has a big part of that perception. You know, the statistics show only 9% of crime in Winnipeg happens downtown. Most Winnipeggers would be shocked that 91% of Winnipeg's crime doesn't happen downtown. Everybody thinks it happens there. So why is that? You know, our crime is no worse downtown than any other city, but the perception is it's completely the opposite. And it's because we don't have a city for people. You know, there's no more panhandlers here, but when you're approached by a panhandler, you're uncomfortable here because there's nobody else on the sidewalk. When you're approached in Vancouver by a panhandler where there's far more poverty in the core, you feel okay by it because you're surrounded by other people. You know, Jane Jacobs was an urban theorist who said that putting eyes on the street is really the key to feeling safer. And so if we can build our downtown into an actual functioning, breathing, vibrant community, I think some of the perceptions of crime start to fade. And then we can, you know, begin to deal with the real challenges of actual crime.
Other panelists?
As Brent alluded, it's an issue of social deprivation and disadvantage rather than anything to do with race. If we look at the high crime parts of Winnipeg are the areas that have lots of Aboriginal people, but they also have low education rates, or high unemployment, and all of the things in social disadvantage. And people have mentioned education. I heard a startling number on the CBC News the other morning. I have a 2-year-old grandson who just started speaking 10-word sentences. On CBC, they quoted a person who's involved with inner city schools who said that some of our kids come to school knowing 30 words. And if that count is accurate, that's an absolutely stunning statistic, because the futures of my grandson at 2 and that child at 5 coming into a school are radically different. And so those are the kinds of underlying issues that have to be addressed. And it probably is the case that most of those kids in the poorest neighborhoods are Aboriginal. And so unless we, to take Wanda's lesson, unless we do something about that, we're not going to have as good a future as we might.
Wanda, did you want to speak to this?
No, I think it was covered.
Okay.
Yeah.
Jim?
Just a quick thought. Winnipeg, in some ways, is exactly the wrong size. Because as the boomers begin to sell their homes in the suburbs, they're not going to be flocking downtown because they can buy a smaller home in the suburb and get downtown in 11 minutes and have access to sport and to culture. So the impetus for those who want to get out of the commuting conundrum and who want to go into a downtown neighborhood where they have all amenities is blunted by the ease of staying in the suburb. If we had 1 million people, we'd have a better chance of solving that problem.
60 years ago, Levittown in Pennsylvania was the first suburban development of that nature. And one of the criticisms had been that it was so much all the same, and there was no creativity or architectural merit to it. When you drive by Waverly West, it's like Levittown all over again. There is no architectural merit. Brent, do you find that there's any way in which that could be remedied?
I can tell you that, yeah, there's not a single architect designing a house in Waverly West. Those are all done by developers. But your point is well taken. I almost look, though, at, I look at our old neighborhoods. I look at River Heights, and if I take away all the trees, those houses are quite similar as well. Like, it's not about diversity. They're lived in now, so they have personal character. But it's about how they are designed. The relationship, the neighborhood that I showed with the car-oriented neighborhood with no sidewalks, the cul-de-sac development, it really, people sort of drive into their two-car garage and they hide behind their garage. It's not a personal experience to be in that neighborhood. Where you go to these areas where the houses are closer to the street, there's sort of a public yard, there's the porch is sort of semi-private, and then there's private. There's sort of these different levels of privacy that sort of engage the community at different levels. You can go inside if you want, or you can sit out and talk maybe, or you can stand on your front yard and engage the community. Sort of designing in those levels of personal interaction into a neighborhood, I think, is critical, and then that's sort of what's lost in our suburban neighborhood.
Up here?
I think the gentleman's name is Mr. Linden. You mentioned that in New York there was a significant drop in crime. And my question was, with a growing population in Winnipeg, when we get to 1 million, of course, I believe that with an increase of population, you can have an increase in crime. What were the factors that caused that significant drop in New York, and can those factors be applied to Winnipeg in the future with our large population to reduce our crime? Because, like Wanda mentioned, even the prisons have a large population of Aboriginals. So how would that be applied to help us in Winnipeg?
We can learn some of the lessons, excuse me, of New York, although there's a big debate about what actually caused the decline. One of the factors is just the aging population, and so that affects Winnipeg. But other factors were better policing. The police would act proactively and try and engage in crime reduction instead of just responding to calls for service. There was a lot of business development. Some of the local biz groups were very involved in neighborhood improvement kinds of things. There were some improvements in the school system, so we can take those kinds of lessons. But I think that the sorts of things that we have to implement to reduce crime are things that any of you would sit down and, if I asked you to list 10 of them on a piece of paper, you'd probably list most of the same 10, and they would all be things that should be done because they're pretty obvious. The one you might miss is just changing the way the police operate, but that's already started to change in Winnipeg now.
Thank you. Chris?
Hi there. My question is, like you kind of touched on when you were talking about the suburbs and that, What I found is the suburban area is usually very impersonal. Kind of like, what my question is more of how do you propose to invigorate more of a community? Like Osborne, reason why it's usually voted as #1 community is it's very, besides pedestrian friendly, you feel very like personal community wise compared to say most like you could even suggest Waverly West will be, but like most of far out suburbs you find very like you drive home, go to your home, you might have community in your home, but like you don't really know your neighbors half the time. Like it's very impersonal that way, and you don't feel connected to your city and B, your suburban area. So that's what I was just wondering, how would you propose to invigorate a more personal community within the city of Winnipeg or within certain areas of Winnipeg?
Yeah, it's a tough question. It's hard. It's difficult to build a suburb that has the character and vibrancy of a traditional neighborhood, and they're building them all over. It's called new urbanism. If you go to Calgary, they're totally in love with it. You drive into these neighborhoods, and it's sort of like Leave It to Beaver. There's the white steeple church and the little main street, but it's actually one gigantic building with little storefronts along it. So it's really sort of manufactured. The only way for me to think that we can create neighborhoods that are authentic is to actually plug them into existing neighborhoods. Like the problem with Waverly West is if that's Winnipeg, it was built here. You know, if we start looking at opportunities to actually infill and build those neighborhoods that have direct connections to those walkable neighborhoods, that's when some of that character will begin, you know, to ooze out and become part of those new neighborhoods as well. And the Fort Rouge Yards is a perfect example of that I mentioned earlier.
Some of the big problems facing Aboriginal communities result in sort of the conclusion, well, until this big thing happens, there's not going to be any change. And I think that's kind of the same attitude that I would have about those communities in Winnipeg that aren't perfect right now. I lived in one of those areas that had no sidewalks. I thought, that's really weird. But that's where I moved to when I came to Winnipeg. But we had a cul-de-sac, and I knew everybody there because we made an effort to do that. And there was a little island in the middle, and we'd have fireworks in winter. I guess that was New Year's, and then in the summertime. And the kids, too, made a difference. So I agree that in the planning stages that would be wonderful if we could have all those things that have been talked about that would make a good community. But I still think it comes down to us as Winnipeggers, wherever we live. If that's the kind of community that we would like to live in, then we can do that, I think.
Thank you.
Professor Linden, you brought up the William White area in the North End. And I think you said that both the federal and the provincial and the city governments were all involved in there, but what I concluded from that, what you said there, that they didn't seem to be coordinated and perhaps even working against each other, if that's, not sure that's the proper.
Not quite in that case. And the project that we're looking at that's going into the William White area, the province announced support for it in the speech for the throne. The mayor just sent a circular around that most of us saw the other day, and in there mentioned the fact that the city's Live Safe program was going into William White. I mentioned that the Winnipeg Police Service have already started to change their practices there, and the federal government involvement is through a tripartite agreement. The initials are ISAA, and I'm not sure what that stands for. But the challenge now is as you alluded, is to try and integrate all that. And I actually am optimistic that that's really going to happen this time. Before that, everybody's operating in isolation. You also have lots of community groups, many of whom spend most of their time fundraising because that's the only way they can keep going, and they actually don't do as much service delivery as they might because they don't have a long life expectancy if they don't get another grant. So the word I think Jim used earlier was dysfunctional. And the existing uncoordinated way of doing things was dysfunctional. So the challenge now is to create a focal point, a responsibility center, and get everybody on the same page with the goal of, and again to use my term, ending crime in this area. To use a better term, it would be making that as safe as my quiet part of Fort Garry is.
Thank you.
is around whether or not any of you think that Winnipeg might be able to do something like Pittsburgh has done. In Pittsburgh, the mayor who was elected calls himself a public entrepreneur, and he when there was a poll around tax increases, there was overwhelmingly opposed by citizens. He said he wasn't going to do it. He raised taxes 10%. But what he did do with that money was he turned around and used that money to rehabilitate all the industrial lands, to invest in various centers of the city and so on, or the downtown. It has more bridges now, apparently this is one of the lines they use, than Venice has. He revitalized it, and he got reelected. Do you think there's any possibility we could do something like that in this city? Because it seems to me we didn't go through the loss of the steel industry the way Pittsburgh did, but in other ways, I think there are a lot of similarities between the challenges that they faced and the challenges we face.
Who'd like to take a stab at that? Jim.
Sure, why don't we increase the provincial sales tax by tenfold? This is a serious problem, because if people can see that their tax money is being used effectively, I think they'll buy it. You have to make a case that the way in which we're going to solve this problem is to develop an investment fund that's going to be able to give us a chance to take a crack at it. People don't realize that Winnipeg has a $7 billion infrastructure deficit. And when the provincial government wanted to raise the provincial sales tax by 1 point, it ran into a huge political storm, because people weren't convinced, for a variety of reasons, that the money was going to be used the way in which they thought it ought to be used. So you have to draw a relationship between the politician's message that the tax is going to build our community and the citizen who believes them. And that's not an easy thing to do.
One thing that we have been doing somewhat successfully, and it's been a greater trend across the country, is it's called a TIF program, or tax increment financing. Yeah. What it is sort of you take the taxes that you wouldn't get if something was built, and you sort of put it back into the building, or you invest in, say, an entire neighborhood. All the property taxes, or a portion of the property taxes, go back and reinvest in proper growth, or what's been identified as desirable growth in that neighborhood. So that's something, without raising taxes sort of blanketly, you're using the income from those taxes to finance desirable growth.
Brent, you talked about putting the human back into our city, and Jim, you took us back to the 1970s, and we've talked about crime and education and Aboriginal youth. I'd like to take us back 100 years ago, when the business leaders of this community saw that the way to substantiate the community, attract people here, retain people here, was the development of the arts community and the founding of the Winnipeg Art Gallery and the School of Art. We know from recent studies it's the arts that have reduced crime in many communities across North America. We know it's the arts that have opened doors to education. We know it's the arts that are the soul of that human spirit. So I'd like to suggest, as we vision forward, that we not forget the role the arts play in making all these links to all these community issues, whether they're health, education, crime, jobs, or the economy. They're not a frill. In fact, they're the glue that links a society together. And I don't know whether any of you have any comments.
Any response to that? I see heads nodding.
Agree. And if you look at the clusters that make Winnipeg special, that would be a leading one. We have way more than a city of this size should expect to have. We're developing a cluster around conflict resolution and human rights, between the Morrow Centre for Peace and Justice here, the Canadian Museum for Human Rights, the Mennonite University. We are developing an international reputation in the field of conflict resolution. We're developing an international reputation for cultural industries and the performing arts, and our art galleries. Well, that's not a bad thing to be known for. And it also plays to our capacity to attract investment, because when you attract investment, you have to attract a workforce, and a workforce wants to live in a place that has an art gallery. So it's all connected, and the reputation that we're developing is the best reputation of all on some of those soft issues that attract people.
Hello. Great talk, everyone, and I think everyone mentioned about lots of great things that needs to be done, and the commentary was the same. But I believe that none of those dreams can come true without proper planning. And given living in this city for about 14 years, and I only see a patchwork, if at best, of the city planning perspective, what do you think is being done or should be done to reach your goals that you presented? Thank you.
I agree. Planning is, I write about it quite often in the Free Press. Planning is critical. There's a couple of recent examples where the city decided that planning was not important. One was the bike lane issue, where they decided they should put the money into building bike lanes as opposed to planning it. And so public backlash sort of made it come back, which was a great thing. But the issue for me is we make these plans. We make the Our Winnipeg plan, which is a great document for growing the city in the future. Then when it comes to giving the plan teeth and making the outlines in that document law or bylaws, then the councillors all sort of balked, because they heard people saying they don't want, like one of the things was having fewer cars in apartment buildings, for an apartment building, because if you offer bike share or that kind of thing, you could sort of get away with it. And people in the neighborhoods got upset that there might be somebody parking on their street. And so all the councillors balked. So I think it's not just about planning, it's about having the guts to stand by the plan and say this is what we believe in as a community, and make our rules or implement the rules, sort of steadfastly. We have heritage protection laws for all of our heritage buildings in our National Historic Site downtown. It's a National Historic Site. 5 buildings have been torn down in the last few years, every single one of them protected. So what's the point of a National Historic Site? What's the point of heritage designation if you can just say, well, I'd rather not pay the taxes, and so let me tear it down, and so it's torn down. So I really think it's sort of having the guts to stand by our plans.
Thank you once again to all of you for your time here tonight. We've mentioned previously the difficulty of designing a new neighborhood to be a character area or have these features that people are looking for, and we've seen the footprint that Winnipeg has been taken since the last 30 years in terms of development relative to density. But how do we make neighborhoods that already exist more willing to accept the things that people seem to want? Winnipeg, no more so in fairness than any other city, has sort of a not in my backyard reputation, where at various turns people have been upset about local industrial developments, density projects. My favorite is Island Lakes didn't want a 7-Eleven in their neighborhood, and that's perhaps one of the most Winnipeg civic pride pieces we have. But so if we all agree that these are various things Winnipeg needs to change to develop, how do we convince people to let change near them?
Anything to add?
It comes back to planning again. You can't, when people get upset about things getting built in their backyard, it's because they weren't consulted, or they're consulted when they see a yellow piece of paper on the telephone pole saying there's a 30-story apartment building going in your backyard tomorrow, and come tell us it's okay. People have to be engaged way before the developer even shows up. If you make a plan at the beginning and invite people and ask them what they want in their community, they will say, I'm okay with a tower, or I'm okay with this type of development. Then when it happens, there's even community support because they understand the value of that. And it even helps developers, because often what happens is they come in and they propose their building, and it's red tape and they're fought by the community, and often they even just give up. But if they come in with a framework knowing that if they do what the plan says, they'll be green lighted all the way through, it helps with economic development. So the key is to plan early.
I just want to go back to the question on planning, because there's an important issue. I think we have to go one step farther than that in order and raise the issue of leadership. Because unless you have leaders with a vision, the plan doesn't make any sense. A plan has to be able to take you somewhere. So it's hard to plan a trip if you don't know what the destination is. So what you're really asking for, and it gets to the response you were just giving to this one as well. A question about the mayor of Pittsburgh, had a vision and put a plan in place, including funding it, to implement that vision. And that's what we should be demanding of municipal leaders, is to have that vision, and from that the strategic planning process flows and things get done.
Wanda?
Just another thought on that. It's buy-in, and I think, you know, in so many different situations, people that are interested in all of these topics that we've covered today, it really is buy-in to the idea, being part of the process. And I want to just make a little comment on the idea around Aboriginal youth and education. That's been a theme that was talked about. And on the face of it, you'd say that's a no-brainer. Everyone should think that that's a great idea. But if the parents of the child have suffered through residential schools, school is something that they don't know as a positive thing. So there's not a buy-in. So all of the great ideas that we can have here in terms of our communities, in terms of the people in those communities, we have to be willing to be part of the discussion and not necessarily just leave it totally to the leaders, but work with the leaders. And it's a whole community working together on practically, I'd say, all of the issues that have been raised tonight. I mean, that buy-in has to be there, and it doesn't come easily. Coming out tonight to even talk about it, I think that's a really cool buy-in. There's a lot of people that probably could have benefited from the discussion tonight. So it's bringing those people in too and inviting them into the circle. So that's my thought.
While you're talking, Wanda, I wonder if I could tie back to something Jim said at the beginning of the evening. And early in his remarks, he was talking about growth of the city coming from people coming from elsewhere, from other countries, and certainly from northern communities. Do you have a perspective on the tension that results there for people coming into Winnipeg from smaller communities, the ties back to those communities, the realities of moving from smaller communities to here and so on? Do you have any observation on that?
It is really tough. The migration pattern, I think, is back and forth because you don't have employment opportunities in your own community, but hey, there's a big city and possibly there's someplace I can get a job, but you don't have affordable housing. You have all of those issues if you've got family. To try to see how to get comfortable in a community that you don't have the same kind of support because you know everybody in the community that you grew up in. So it's a huge leap. It's tough. I know that people go back and forth to their communities and they may never get settled in a large city. But I think that's also some of the things that new Canadians also face, and there's lots of supports. I think we know what has to be done. It's just getting the resources behind that to help people be successful here if that's what they'd like to do.
Thank you.
So I've lived in Winnipeg for 15 years, and more than half of those I spent in that other neighborhood, not River Heights, that you showed, Brent. And so my family were very guilty of suburbanites. And so I guess my question is, how do you encourage or how do you slow down suburbanization of Manitoba? Because we've gone outside the city limits. I think they're still developing Waverly West, is it? And I guess my perception is that immigrants who are incoming, especially from South America, Asia, Europe, in high density, high population areas, who've been living in apartments, who grew up in apartments, are like, hey, we can buy a house now in suburbia. How do you encourage people to go into those nice neighborhoods that you want to develop, more like River Heights and Corden and all that, where you've got the nice mix of business and entertainment and community and housing?
I'm a bit of a disciple of a Danish urbanist, Jan Gehl, and he always says you can't force people to live somewhere, but you can invite them to live somewhere. So the only thing, it's true, we can't force people, and lots of people love their cul-de-sac for many reasons. and it will never stop. But we can, as a community, make invitations for people to live alternatively. And I think if we do invest in things like infill development, like give tax incentive to infill development, use transit-oriented, or use rapid transit to sort of focus development in certain places, we can begin to create these neighborhoods that people will find attractive. Like the highest real estate values in the city are in these traditional neighborhoods. So people aren't being forced to live there. I think if we just make an invitation, people will find that attractive.
Just wanted to throw out one thought. Have you tried to cross the tracks on Waverly lately? And you know that if you show up there in the rush hour, you're going to hit one train for sure, maybe two, going in opposite directions. Rail relocation is a subject that's been debated in this community for a long time. And there is all of that land, the Weston Yards, that separates the north end from the inner city of Winnipeg, which represents an unbelievable development opportunity. And I would be interested in knowing from Brent what he thinks would be the best use of those acres and how he thinks we could get ourselves into a position of actually being able to do something with them.
Of the main yard? Yeah. Yeah, I see that as a great opportunity for, especially for Aboriginal and inner city development. It's it's going to be a long-term process, no question. It'll be 50 years out, but we need to start planning that now because there will come a time when that area is going to be available to us, and we don't want to just spring on the dumbest idea or the first developer that gets there. We want to plan for that, and I really think that's the perfect example of being able to tie that community together. Like it's a real scar in the north end, and it divides the neighborhood. If we can use that space to sort of weave that neighborhood together and reinvigorate it with investment and development, I think we can begin to provide opportunity for the people that live in that neighborhood. I think it's critical. We're not going to get people who live in Linden Woods to go live there, and that's not even the point. The point is to create economic opportunity for the people that live in that neighborhood. It shouldn't just be a Stuckelbach suburb. It needs to be a development that provides economic opportunity, small business, low rent housing, low rent retail space to provide opportunity for new immigrants and Aboriginal people.
I think about the children of Winnipeg, and as I grew up, there was always kids playing out on the streets. We had a neighborhood rink, and even as long as 20 years ago, as little as 20 years ago, many school yards had a rink. So if you couldn't afford to be in a league, you could still go out and have recreation and play. And how do we convince parents to let their kids back out on the street and to say that community clubs are really important because children need something to do, and it also helps them have a sense of their community and their neighborhood.
Anyone from the panel?
I've talked enough.
Pardon?
Yeah, I think community clubs, my favorite thing about Winnipeg is that it's a city of neighborhoods like no other city. And everybody is their neighborhood, no matter where they live. I'm an NK boy. I grew up in North Kildonan. I haven't been there in 20 years, but I'm always an NK boy. And I think that's a great thing about Winnipeg, and it's something that we really don't want to lose. That's again that human scale development. It's the neighborhood ice rink as opposed to the quadplex on the perimeter, which cities like Calgary are going to, where you have to drive to. And I think Winnipeg, the great thing about Winnipeg is that our old city, our traditional city, is really human-oriented, and those community clubs are a huge part of that. They're a part of defining what each neighborhood is, and I think we shouldn't lose that.
Thank you. Chris, do we have another? Okay.
Thank you. Very good comments from the panel and people. I have a comment first. Moving from 750,000 people to 1 million, I don't see much downside to that. But if it's to result in the same mix of rich and poor as we already have, we really haven't gained very much. And I think if you did the math, if somebody would do the math and solve the poverty problems of the 750,000 that we already have, we would be far better off financially as a community than just straight moving to 1 million. As a question, though, as a small time employer, you might say, my company gets all kinds of incentives to hire immigrant people. We get all kinds of incentives in our community and elsewhere to hire graduates of university, for summer students, for high school students, and so on. Never do I come across an incentive to hire people or find people who have low incomes and need the opportunity to advance themselves. And so I'd like to ask Wanda particularly, and comment to, there's no government people here. This is a government problem. This is a problem of everybody in Manitoba. How would you see the government doing something to help make sure that the poor people have employment?
Well, what comes to mind immediately is the social enterprise project. That's, I'm great with street names. It's the one over the tracks just past downtown. It's the first street off Main, I think, or yeah. Okay, sorry. Anyway, there's a social enterprise project there. It's called Build. And I went to see it. I thought it was very interesting what they were doing. And they were specifically targeting the low-income people in that area. And the way that the business worked was they got contracts for the skills that they then taught, or that they taught the people from the area. Immigrants, but mostly low-income Aboriginal people are hired there. And it's retrofitting toilets in Manitoba housing. So they have the contract to do that. They hire the people, they get the skills, they train them, and it's that self-perpetuating cycle. And I thought it was really exciting because it's kind of a new project in Winnipeg. There's other interesting businesses in that building as well that are looking more at social enterprise that focuses on people as well as profit. I think looking creatively at ways to encourage people to provide a service and a product, I think that's really cool to have that whole thing all built in together. I think that would be really exciting in Winnipeg. And as far as incentives to employers around people with low income, I think, again, they're tried and true formulas for encouraging people to get into those programs as employers and potential employees that could be extended and be creatively marketed so that people understood what they could do and how they could participate in those programs. I remember being on, I think it was CBC, actually, a radio program, and we were talking about that. We had a fellow who had a manufacturing business on Higgins, and he couldn't imagine why there weren't any Aboriginal people applying, because he really wanted to hire people from the inner city. And right next door is the Centre for Aboriginal Human Resource Development, Carr, in the Aboriginal Centre, who trains people, but they were like, they didn't even know about each other, and he left the show going, oh, okay, great, now I know. So I think it's communication too is a big part of it, that there's opportunity out there. People want to hire others like that to help out Winnipeg. So
thank you. We're getting, sure.
Very quickly. I'm really passionate about this as well, creating economic opportunity sort of organically is the way I look at it. And urban design has a big urban policy has a big role to play in this. I mean, our sort of city fathers always go back to the mega project well in sort of trying to redevelop our city. We do these, you know, the shed development, entertainment districts, or we do these gigantic 30-story skyscrapers and think that that's economic growth. And I'm a huge proponent of, you know, those kind of things. As an architect, that's my livelihood. But I look as an example, the Centerpoint development across from the MTS Center. It's a huge $80 million project. It tore down a tiny little one-story building that had 12 tiny little retail units in it. It was a nondescript, and most people would say ugly building, but it had an Ethiopian restaurant in it. New immigrants, that was their opportunity. They can't go into the new building because the rents are just way too high. You know, when I went ballistic when they tore down the old Shanghai restaurant for that exact reason. That's the kind of building that provides people opportunity. You know, it had 10 residential units above 5 small retail units. It was a 150-year-old building. It would be really a great opportunity to provide economic opportunity for those groups, you know, immigrants and Aboriginal people, and just, you know, people who need that start. And everything we do is sort of this top-down mega project solution, when really we need to be thinking about the small little things to provide that opportunity.
So we're coming to the end. I'd like to close with brief responses to two things. One more question from social media, and then one more up here, and then final comments.
Okay. This one, it's so hard to pick. This one has come in a number of times, though, so I'll choose it. And it kind of speaks to, it probably caps the evening well. So in 20 years, we can dream big and be whatever we want to be, and population of 1 million into all of the areas. You know, we can be more human, we can have less crime, we can have more sustainable jobs, but it won't mean anything if we don't have people here. And so the question that's come in a number of times tonight on social media is, and I'll read Jill Hansen's verbatim, how do we keep Gen Y in Winnipeg when they can't wait to leave? What's one thing?
Who wants to start? Brent, what did you say? Love?
Make them love our city.
Wanda.
You know what? It's not bad to go away, but make it a good reason to come back and bring back whatever it is that had them leave in the first place. And love, actually, I think another kind of love. I'm always shocked at how many students want to stay here and do not want to leave, actually, in my life here in the university. And so love also is a good thing.
Last comment, question.
Sorry. Okay, we've heard a whole lot, very much about planning in this session. And one of the advantages of Winnipeg is its water supply, despite the brown water little blip here. In 1913, the city planned for 850,000 people and built the aqueduct accordingly, which has really contributed to the system in Winnipeg. They were a bit more optimistic about that, but it was a good decision. They engaged the province, the city, the two cities, City of St. Boniface, and 5 municipalities in executing that project. If we're going to get to be 1 million people, we're going to have to do something about planning our infrastructure. And we've already heard about the infrastructure deficit. So the question is, how are we, and we heard about the nominee project and how 3 levels of government have worked together. The question is, how do we go about getting the 3 levels of government working together to resolve Winnipeg's infrastructure deficit and to have it ready for 1 million people?
Easy final question.
Yeah,
Jim?
1973 was a great year for a lot of reasons. It was the last time that 3 levels of government had a conversation in Canada about infrastructure. And it didn't lead to much. So there isn't any mechanism that we've developed yet in Canada to sort out which level of government is best positioned to deliver what services to its citizens at what cost. And the only way that we're going to come to terms with this multi-billion-dollar deficit is not for a series of one-offs that satisfies a community or a bridge that needs repair or a water system that's out of date. but to have a pan-Canadian discussion among all of its leaders in the public and private sector so that we can establish a plan, which plays to the way in which we make policy in Canada, which is another discussion for another time that I won't go into now.
Thank you very much. I want to say thank you to the panelists and thank you to all of you. There are many occasions when I like to say about the work that my colleagues and I are involved in that both the cause and the company are great. It's pretty easy to get motivated about doing university work, teaching, research, engagement in the community. And we get to work with some amazing people, our students, our faculty and staff, and people like you who've come here tonight who are interested in the things that matter in our community, and certainly people like our panelists. So I want to thank all of you. I want to remind you that at the beginning, when the opening remarks were made, Wanda suggested that each of us might think of one thing we could do to make the city better and articulate that to the person adjacent to us where we're sitting. So just before you sneak out, I know you've been incubating those ideas, so if you have them, you can articulate them to each other. Please join us on Wednesday, October the 30th for the next in our Visionary Conversation series, when we will explore the topic Sticks and Stones, Are We a Society of Bullies? That'll take place on our Bannatyne campus. Similarly, reception at 6:30 and the Joe Dope Concourse, with the discussion to follow at 7 o'clock in the Gaspard Theatre at the Basic Medical Sciences Building. I think it'll be a lively conversation, as it has been tonight. Thank you for coming.